Du Comité permanent des pêches et des océans.
Welcome to the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
Of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and express gratitude that we're able to do the important work of this committee on lands they've stewarded since time immemorial. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting to continue its study of marine and coastal protections. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule sur
Today's meeting is being held in hybrid format in accordance with the rules. MPs may participate in person or over Zoom.
In-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, but particularly the interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I'd also like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. En ce qui concerne, please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. Et en ce qui concerne l'interprétation,
And concerning interpretation, you may use your earpieces and choose the desired
should be addressed.
Je vous rappelle que toutes les interventions doivent être adressées
Dans la salle, si vous souhaitez prendre la parole, veuillez.
au président.
For MPs in the room, if you wish to take the floor, please raise your hand.
Today, we have Jim McIsaac, Executive Director, BC Shrimp Trawlers Association. We have Michael Barron, President, Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association, and Diana Barkley, President, Little Campbell Hatchery Society. So with that, we're going to start with opening remarks for 5 minutes or less, starting with Jim McIsaac.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee, for the invitation to speak here today. The BC Shrimpers Association is made up of small-scale, independent trawl fishermen. We run either a beam trawl or an otter trawl. All are under 65 foot, fitted with bycatch reduction grates and LED lights to further reduce bycatch. We are by far the cleanest shrimp fishery on the planet. Canada's 2023 MPA standards exclude all trawl from new MPAs, including shrimp. These standards treat beam, butterfly, and otter trawl nets just like super trawlers that can hold BC Place in its mouth. Shrimp is one of Canada's favorite seafoods. If we do not get our wild shrimp from our ecosystems, we will get it from much less pristine ecosystems. I've spent tens of thousands of hours in fisheries planning, ocean planning, marine protected area planning processes. These are vastly different processes. In them, I have worked to protect harvesters, fisheries, marine ecosystems, and our coastal communities. Over the last 10 years, the number of BC harvesters has declined 25%, the processing jobs have declined 35%, and our rural coastal economy continues to spiral down. MPAs do not stop the major threats to our ocean. Pollution, climate change, acidification, oil spills, illegal, unregulated, unreported fishing, and invasive species do not stop at the boundaries of MPAs. MPAs cannot hide from global drivers. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia, perhaps the best global example of an MPA, was created when oil drilling and coral mining threatened to destroy the reef's $9 billion tourism, fisheries, and aquaculture economy. After 50 years of protection, the reef is not entirely dead. It is in a state of crisis, facing severe, rapid decline, pushing the reef towards a critical tipping point. Drawing a line around the reef is not saving this ecosystem. MPAs will not solve the complex reconciliation issues we face either, but they sure can exacerbate them. Canada is no longer a country where citizens are equal before the law. We now treat knowledge as sacred based on race, not integrity. Our development of MPAs over the last 10 years exposes this new paradigm. I was appointed to the Haida Gwaii Marine Advisory in 2011. The Council of the Haida Nation co-manages several MPAs with Canada. One village chief told our advisory the CHN does not have the authority to close fishing areas without village approval. As a result, when Canada enters into agreements with the CHN on MPAs, Haida villages are exempt. There are hundreds of other race-based closures on the West Coast, including most IPCAs and all 164 RCAs. Don't get me wrong, there should be way more than 50 fishermen in Haida Gwaii, at least 500, with associated full fisheries economy. For the last 35 years, Canada has focused on protecting corporate access on our coast, not harvester, First Nation, or coastal community access. But that is another story. To manage the MPA, the NSB MPA network, $335 million was granted to a private First Nations entity, including $200 million from Canada. In the NSB Network Action Plan, Indigenous fisheries are exempt. DFO refused to grant the same exemption to small-scale fishermen, many that have operated in the area for 5 generations. Local non-Indigenous communities were not invited to co-manage the area, nor were they given funding to protect their well-being linked to the area. 25 years ago, most BC harvesters supported MPAs. They do not today. Initially, in creating MPAs, fishermen gave freely of their ecosystem knowledge, only to be lied to and deceived by bureaucrats, have their fisheries data shared without consent, and have their knowledge used against them. Hard-fought-for agreements have been changed at the last minute, some after they were announced. In at least one case, closures were announced after fisheries plans were approved and harvesters on the water. Small-scale harvesters have been fined heavily for fishing in new MPAs. Most had no idea that the areas they had fished for decades were now closed. MPAs do have a place in our marine ecosystem, but they are not the silver bullet to protect biodiversity. Montreal's CBD has 23 targets, not just one. MPAs must have measurable objectives and targets, and closures must apply to all users. MPA planning should be done inside of larger ocean planning processes or fisheries planning processes. Thank you for attention. Hopefully this has been useful. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And with that, we're now going to go to Michael Barron for 5 minutes or less.
Good afternoon, Honorable Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear for you today. My name is Michael Barron, President of Cape Breton Fish Harvesters Association. I'm not here as an academic or a policy expert, but a commercial fisherman from Nova Scotia, someone whose livelihood and whose community's futures depends on healthy ocean and fair workable management. No one in the fishing industry is opposed to conservation. In fact, our livelihoods depend on it. If the resource fails, so do we. Since 2015, however, marine coastal protection in Canada has changed rapidly. While some of that change has been necessary, much of it has left fishers wondering whether conservation is being measured in ways that actually reflect what is happening on the water. In 2015, less than 1% of Canada's marine waters were protected. Since then, DFO moved quickly to meet international targets, 10% by 2020, when actually by 2019, that 10% was actually met at 13.8%, so it exceeded what they were looking for. On the water, the picture is more complicated. From a fisherman's perspective, success has been measured mostly by how many square kilometers are drawn on a map, not whether fish stocks are rebuilding, habitats are improving, or fishing communities are more secure. The gap between policy and reality is where a lot of frustration comes from. In Nova Scotia, there's 2 areas that stand out, St. Anne's Bank and the Eastern Canyons. St. Anne's Bank has supported commercial fishing for generations. It's a working area, not a pristine one, but productive, and it matters to the people who fish there. Since its designation as a conservation area, fishers have been left with uncertainty. Some activities are still allowed, others aren't, and many of us still don't know what success looks like in DFO's eyes. We don't know what baseline is being used, what's being monitored, or what would trigger changes, either more restrictions or fewer. From where we sit, it feels like we're being asked to accept limits without being shown clear evidence of what those limits are achieving. The Eastern Canyons Marine Refuge raised similar concerns. No one disputes the importance of protecting deep sea or corals. Fishers understand sensitive habitat better than most, but this refuge also highlights a bigger issue. Very large areas are being counted towards conservation targets while much activity continues as before. At the same time, there's little public reporting to show whether the habitat is actually improving. So the question for fishers becomes simple. Are these measures about real protection, or are they about meeting international targets as quickly as possible? For commercial fishers, especially in the inshore owner-operator fleets, these designations have real consequences. We deal with increasing spatial restrictions, uncertainty about futures access, layers of regulation that keep piling up. Meanwhile, consultation often feels like it happens after decisions are mostly made. We're told what's coming, not asked what will work. That erodes trust, and without trust, conservation becomes harder, not easier. Enforcement and monitoring are another concern. We're told areas are protected, but many of us don't see consistent monitoring or enforcement on the water. There's limited baseline data and even less long-term reporting that shows whether these areas are healthier today than they were before protection. Fishers are being asked to shoulder responsibility without being shown results. Climate change is also changing everything we know. Fish are moving, water temperatures are rising, productivity is shifting. Yet most protected areas have fixed boundaries that don't move with the ecosystem. From a fishing perspective, that raises real concern that we're locking in management decisions that won't make sense 10 to 20 years from now. Finally, there's an issue with coordination. Offshore protection is federal, but what happens along the coast, habitat, and shoreline development pollution often undermines what we are trying to protect. Fishers see that disconnect clearly, even when policy doesn't. In closing, fishers want healthy oceans, we always have, but conservation has to be more than lines on a map. It has to be measured by real ecological results, clear rules, meaningful involvement of people who work on the water, and management that can adapt as conditions change. Right now, too many fishers feel that marine protection is something being done to us, not with us. If DFO wants conservation to succeed in places in Lake Nova Scotia, that needs to change. Thank you for listening. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Barron. We're going to conclude now with opening remarks from Diana Barclay for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking Fisheries and Oceans for 40-plus years of not only financial support, but for the hands-on DFO involvement that has been invaluable to our hatchery. Today, I thought I'd give you a bit of a background on our organization, tell you about the work we do and the importance of Canada's marine protection efforts, and I'd like to share with you our ambitious plans going forward. Salmon conservation, stock assessment, conducting community stewardship, and public outreach have been key objectives since our organization was founded in 1957. Our 29-acre property, which we own, is located on the traditional and unceded territory of the Coast Salish people, the traditional territory of the Semiahmoo First Nation, and we have a long-standing relationship with the Semiahmoo First Nation. We've been a partner of the DFO Salmonoid Enhancement Program since 1982. Our hatchery is committed to protecting and enhancing salmon habitat and salmonoid populations in our area of the Little Campbell watershed in British Columbia. Our dedicated volunteers monitor our fish fence daily, and during spawning season are there from dawn till dusk. As an example, one Sunday this past November, the coho decided it was time, and more than 1,300 came through the fence that day. It caught us a bit by surprise, but our hardworking volunteers were up to the task. This year was a record year, and we counted 4,475 coho and 1,134 chinook. We enumerate all returning fish, distinguishing species, wild from hatchery, male from female, and we share all that data with the DFO. We collect broodstock, taking eggs and managing incubation. This year, our egg take was over 103,000. After rearing, we put them back into the Little Campbell River. Each year, we release approximately 100,000 salmon. Over 40-plus years, we estimate our small hatchery has raised and released some 4 million salmon. Community hatcheries like ours complement marine protection efforts by rebuilding vulnerable stocks that depend on healthy estuaries and coastal waters, particularly for populations such as the threatened Boundary Bay Chinook. The success of our freshwater enhancement work depends heavily on what happens once these fish reach the estuary and nearshore marine environment, where habitat quality, water conditions, and bycatch management play a major role in survival. Protecting the Little Campbell Estuary and Boundary Bay nearshore habitats is crucial to ensuring that the fish we release have a meaningful chance to survive and return as adults. Education is also a primary focus for us. We provide eyed eggs every fall for the Salmon in the Classroom program, and we conduct tours for the students and seniors, as well as the public at large. Last year alone, our volunteers conducted over 80 school tours. More than 4,000 children, parents, and teachers learned about the important work we do. Over the decades, we have provided tours to hundreds of thousands of people. Our 100% volunteer-operated hatchery is funded through the DFO, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, our club memberships, rental revenues from a banquet hall, and fundraisers such as our annual Salmon Sessions Outdoor Music Festival. Before I close, I want to share with you our ambitious plans to replace our 46-year-old hatchery building and to double our enhancement breeding program. The current building represents health and safety concerns due to water damage caused by frequent floods, and the aging hatchery infrastructure is an ever-increasing risk of failure. With climate change and increased urban development in the Little Campbell watershed, these catastrophic flood events are expected to become more frequent and severe. A new hatchery building, built on higher ground, will help make our programs resilient and adaptable to these changes. In 2022, we applied for the BC Salmon Restoration and Innovation Fund, but we were much too early in our planning process. The SHRIFT program has been most successful on many levels, and we urge you to consider bringing back this valuable fund to further support salmon recovery. Ultimately, our objective is to continue our salmon enhancement and stock assessment efforts to ensure the ongoing health of coho, chinook, and steelhead populations in the Little Campbell River. With 100% of our coho and chinook being adipose fin clipped, the fish raised in our hatchery contribute to a robust sports injury on the Little Campbell River, as well as recreational fisheries in the marine approach areas. Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Barclay. And so with that, we're going to begin our opening round of questions, the 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Arnold.
Thank you, and thank all three witnesses for your opening remarks. I'm going to start off with Mr. McIsaac. Mr. McIsaac, so far in this study, we've heard some interesting testimony, some that stated that when it comes to coastal marine protections and fisheries, we can have both. And it doesn't have to be a binary choice of one or the other. Conservation and fisheries can coexist. What would be your take on this?
I certainly think that they have to coexist if we want to have fisheries. I mean, we can't wipe out stocks in the ecosystem and intend to have an economy future down the road.
The conservation protection areas should coexist with fisheries, or we can have conservation and fisheries at the same time.
So if you're talking about conservation areas, our fisheries on our coast, we've had protected areas, fisheries protected areas for decades, more than that, 50, 100 years. So we've had areas where, the mainland inlets where sablefish spawn have been off limits for the sablefish fishery for decades. It's not written on any map or anything like that. But it's there. We do all different kinds of use of protected areas inside of fisheries planning.
Would you say that there was a balance possibly with the protected areas that had been established and the fisheries, and is that balance changing in your take on this? Well,
what I would say is that the ecological management of our coast is certainly changing. This is something that's new. We didn't do marine protected areas for ecosystem objectives 20 years ago. 15 years ago, we had less than 1% of our coast in MPAs. Now we have 35% of our coast in MPAs with these ecological targets. And that's vastly different than targets for fisheries.
Previous witnesses for the study had varying testimony on the notion of spillover effects of protected areas. What's your take on the so-called spillover effect if we, under the previous protected areas that we had, or if we go to this 30 by 30 plan that the Liberals are proposing? So
under fisheries management, the structure that we use for our fisheries is biomass modeling, and we use that to develop harvest control rules, across space and time. there are no current mechanisms to incorporate spatial closures or spatial protections into those models. So basically, what that means is that the areas outside, we don't benefit from spillover. The quota is determined prior to that, and as a matter of fact, in a pinch species, kind of realm, we get punished. So an example of that is something like Frederick Island and Yelloweye. It's a rockfish conservation area, has been one for 24 years, something like that. And the Yelloweye, it's pushing the fishery out rather than further. So it's making a de facto larger closed area. And it's not changing the quota for Yelloweye.
In the Northern Shelf Bioregion, or NSB, that network of MPAs, there are conditions and prohibitions that have been established for fisheries. And I've heard that fisheries exemptions have also been established for the NSB network. Is that correct? And can you shed some light on that for us?
Yeah, there is a set of exemptions inside of the Network Action Plan, which is one that's been approved. And we asked, that's the one that I referenced, we asked for an exemption for small-scale harvesters, for independent harvesters in the area. That wasn't granted, but the exemption that exists in there is for Indigenous harvest and traditional use, including practices of FSC, so food, social, and ceremonial, and will continue in accordance with legal rights and obligations. So Indigenous harvest is allowed in the NSB.
Even though it's recognized as a protected area? Yeah, okay, thank you. What trend do you see in the amount of foreign control of fisheries in BC, and is that compounding with what's happening with these tentative closure areas?
I don't know how to associate those two.
Okay. Just wondering, is the whole overall industry declining, or?
Like the number of fishermen is declining, the number of processing jobs is declining, the economy in rural coastal communities is declining.
Is that a combination of multiple effects?
Well, yes, it's definitely multiple effects, but I would say the largest impact over the last 10 years is going from 1% of our coast in MPAs to 35% in MPAs.
Time? No.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Cormier for 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Just for being here today. Look, my father, like I said that many times, was a fisherman all his life, and I, truly know how important fishing community are for like some of those people. But like Mr. Byron, I'll go to you first. And look, maybe for all of you, it's not because we're sitting on government side that we agree sometimes to what we're trying to achieve, and this is why we have you here, right? We want to know what's wrong with these MPA that are being developed. So, Mr. Byron, you were saying that you feel like this is it's a thing that it's already been decided, right? So, did you attend some of those meetings with DFO official about those MPA? Did you see some map? Did they told you you will not be able to fish in those areas? Like what's the sense in this meeting? Like what is the vibe?
So I actually was on the original working group in between 2012 2013 for St. Anne's Bank, just off Cape Breton, and there was two what I consider fairly good consultation meetings. But then after that, it was just check the box because they had to have so many. And what we put forth as recommendations wasn't even close to what we asked because, like,
give me an example of recommendation to give to the committee or in the meeting. Give me just an example. Yeah.
So we asked for. They gave us 3 specific areas that they were going to allow us to take from, and we asked them for certain Latin long coordinates so we could harvest within there, and we didn't get them in the number 3 take zone, and that was the most lucrative halibut fishing grounds, and ended up pretty much displacing some of the fleet that was able to venture a little bit further offshore than others, and it put it outside the realm to even make it worthwhile going.
In the zone or in these area that you were being told that this will be an MPA, were you ever told by official that in this area it will be closed to fishing no matter what?
In Zone 1, yes.
Okay.
Right? So because there's 4 zones within St. Anne's Bank. And so we were told that there was going to be places where we were going to be able to harvest, and they wanted our recommendations.
So that being said, it will prevent a lot of fishermen that will not be able to fish for, you said halibut, you said, or lobster also, or?
So zones 2 and 4 are mainly halibut. There's some snow crab in zone 3. Zone 2 is all your lobster trap, and there's a little bit of fall halibut fishery.
Did they talk about any compensation, for example, if zero at all? Did you put that as a recommendation, for example?
Because as an industry, we're not looking for compensation. We're looking to maintain a way of life that we're used to making. We're not looking for handouts, and that's what compensation is.
And I totally understand, but for example, automobile sector, for example, is taking a hit right now. Government is putting, some help for them. But let's say there's an MPA that will impact some fishing community. Don't you think that there need to be some kind of help going to these community also?
Yes, but this is already an established MPA. So, I mean, if there was any future MPAs, then it might, it might have to be a discussion to take place then.
Okay. Mr. McIsaac, you were talking about your shrimp fisheries, I think. It's a little bit different on BC, I think, than compared to us in Atlantic Canada. But is the zone that you're talking about, just because I don't know the area like that, well, is it close to shrimp fisheries, or this is a proposed MPA, or?
So the Canadian MPA standards that came out in 2023 have 4 prohibitions. One of those prohibitions is to trawl. And so all trawl in MPAs, new MPAs, are excluded. So any new MPA that comes up, it's excluded.
Like no fishing?
Across the country, not here, not just in BC,
okay.
So everywhere.
Okay. So did you put any recommendation also when you had those meetings with the official?
We tried to have that changed when ECCC put it forward. In 2022.
And there was nothing done, no one was closed. No. So what was the impact on your fishers? So all future MPAs, and there's quite a few still in proposal in the West Coast, are off limits for shrimp. So we have to be very, very careful about which ones we support and which ones we don't. They're also looking backwards to MPAs that were already approved to implement those 4 exemptions. So yeah, they're going backwards. So do you think, like you're being put in front of something without even knowing what's the benefit of doing an MPA, for example? Yes, of course, we want to protect the ecosystem. We know that, blah blah blah. But is there some real, tangible way to see this?
Canada's a big country, and we're painting with a very, very big brush. You're talking about putting small owner-operator trawlers that are less than 60 foot compared to ones that are almost a kilometer, and that's a kind of term that you've put into the MPA standards. So we're all painted by that same brush.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier. Et prochainement, on va Monsieur Deschênes pour 6 minutes.
And next, we have Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, good afternoon, witnesses. Can you hear me? Yes? I read yesterday that Newfoundland and Labrador tore up a memorandum of understanding for a marine protected area. Do you get the impression that these could the same thing could happen in your sectors, where you live?
For British Columbia, I think it's very unlikely that they're going to tear up an agreement on the Northern Shelf bioregion. The federal government has entered into a funding agreement along with the province with the First Nations entity in the North Coast, $335 million. So I think that's highly unlikely.
I mean, in my area now, with this one already being in place, St. Anne's Bank, and the Eastern Canyon's already being in place, I don't see one happening off Cape Breton, but in another part of Nova Scotia, down off the Eastern Shore, they're looking at taking away all of LFA 32 as an MPA. So, I mean, they would definitely want to see that agreement not there.
Parce que je me dis, il y a quand même une leçon à tirer de ce qui se passe.
Because I think there's a lesson to be drawn from what's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador. If there's no social acceptability, a government could withdraw. What, for you, Mr. McIsaac, what are the ways, and you say in your sector there may not be any backing down, but what proposals might you make to improve the process?
I mean, we've made multiple proposals to improve the process. We've offered to be, part of the collaboration in designing it, and that has not been accepted. We've made multiple proposals on how to change it. So, local fishermen are part of that and part of the exemption. I co-chaired a session at COP15 in Montreal of small-scale fishers, right? So we had small-scale fishers from across the planet talking about MPAs. Two of the bright spots around the planet for small-scale fishers come from Indonesia and Chile. Both of them involve having protected areas for small-scale harvesters. Indonesia has about 80% of their EEZ protected for small-scale harvesters. In Chile, they have what's called territorial user right fisheries that protects the area inside the MPA for local harvesters. So corporations and multinational fishers have to be outside of that, and their government enforces that.
Et donc,
And so it comes back to listening more to fishermen and following their recommendations. Is that right?
Fishermen need to be part of the process. They need to be collaborating on the process.
okay. Et présentement, là,
And currently, so that I understand the process, you were consulted. How did things evolve?
So the MPA network discussion started in 2010. The federal government and the province drafted an agreement on MPAs, and we've had probably, hundreds of meetings about it, since. And I would say our key recommendations have been ignored or dismissed through the process.
les recommandations étaient choisies, c'était des...
And when the recommendations were chosen, what group did they come from?
Most of the so the MPA network process is an ecological process. So it's got what I would say is a one-dimensional objective. It's ecological. The social economic objectives are not. They're not. They don't have the same weight. So if you want to do this, you have to do it inside of integrated planning on the coast, where multiple objectives can happen. That is where MPA planning should be.
Donc, les décisions qui ont été prises, là,
So the decisions that were made, which went against what you were proposing, those decisions were proposed by ecological groups, and they had the ear of the decision makers. Is that right?
Yes.
OK. Et vous, M. Baron, comment...
And you, Mr. Barron, what do you propose to improve the process and the acceptability among fishers?
Instead of providing lip service like the department does sometimes and say they want to weigh in and use fishers' local knowledge on, how to operate and stuff, actually use it, because we're the boots on the boat. We're the ones that see what happens day to day. Like, it's not the NGOs that are going to sit in front of you and argue that we want to destroy the ocean as an industry, because they don't understand what we see day to day. So there has to be real-time, meaningful consultation, and we actually have to be heard and part of the process, like Mr. McIsaac said.
Pensez-vous que c'est possible?
Do you think it's possible to come to some kind of reconciliation between Fisher's interests and protection objectives?
Answer, because we are at time.
Yes, but there has to be clear, concise communication in order to come to those decisions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Deschênes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
First round, we're going to move on to the second round, starting with Mr. Small for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the witnesses. Mr. Barron, this marine conservation strategy of 30 by 30, even eco experts claim that results can't be measured. So it seems a little like the Liberal carbon tax plan that was supposed to put money in people's pockets and clean the air at the same time.
To me, it seems like they're more or less trying to match or meet what the UN was looking for, and without any real meaningful consultation, that they were kind of just full charging ahead. But the one thing that they seem to forget when they put these in place, that if we can't fish within a certain area in an MPA and we're required to travel further, well, we're creating a greater carbon footprint.
That brings me to something here. Have you had your livelihood either negatively or positively affected by the closed area, St. Anne's Bank, that you referenced earlier?
It's definitely not been positive. We've had to rechange the way that we fish certain areas at certain times of the year.
So, what year was that protected area put in place?
2015.
To your knowledge, so that's just over 10 years ago. To your knowledge, has DFO scientists or any other scientists or NGOs went out there and measured whatever it was that they were trying to protect, and to see if it's actually been protected, or if that, I'm assuming it's coral or something, or sponge, or if there's been an improvement?
So our association actually has been contracted by the department a couple times over the 10 years to do a little bit of monitoring, but the amount of monitoring that's being done has not been beneficial, and it has not been consistent.
So do you think before the government moves ahead further down the journey of 30 by 30, as it's instructed to by the United Nations, do you think it would be better for everyone and better for ecosystems and whatnot if there were measurements taken to check out to make sure that the things that are supposed to be protected are being protected, and if these marine protected areas are delivering the outcomes that are desired?
Yes, that goes without saying. I mean, because without any real proper monitoring, and for what they are trying to protect, we don't know what the growth of what they're trying to protect, if it's actually being successful.
So, staying with Mr. Barron, if fish harvesters are told that 30% of Canadian waters had to be closed to fishing, will you be able to give some advice on where those closed areas should be as a real partner?
Yes, of course, because, I mean, as a fisherman, we make our livelihood on the water, so we know what times of year, when to move for certain species.
So, some group says this area here is more precious than this area over here. Over here, there's nobody fishing. The more precious area of the ecosystem, the organisms, and all God's creatures are over in an area, who knows, where no one knows what exists there in these depths and in these areas. So do you think the setting up of these marine protected areas is a measure to protect ecosystems or a measure to stop fishing?
To be honest, at times, feels like to stop fishing. But the one thing that these people have to take into consideration, especially in areas like where I'm from and where you're from, MP Small, some of our seasons only operate for 2 months of the year. So there's 10 months of the year that there's nothing actually happening on the water in certain locations. So that should be taken into to the percentage somehow.
Thank you. My next question is to Mr. McIsaac. Mr. McIsaac, funding streams flow from various organizations, and we've heard talk that some funding sources are foreign to support the setting up of some of these marine closures to economic activity. Have you heard anything to that effect coming out of the BC coast?
That's certainly part of the $335 million that is going to the First Nations entity on the North Coast for the NSB is from a foreign entity.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're at time here. So next we are going to go to Mr. Clausen. Okay. You have the floor for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for being here. I don't think there's anybody in Canada that doesn't want us to make sure that fishing and conservation can exist side by side, and that we want to protect the industry and the livelihood of people who are on the waters. Mr. McIsaac, you were talking about some of the other countries that have MPAs, and I'm just wondering if you can give us a little bit of a comparison of how they are structuring them versus the way Canada is structuring them.
I'm certainly not an expert in that, but from the COP15 panel that I chaired, I would say that the majority of small-scale harvesters around the planet are deeply concerned with the objective of 30 by 30. We had examples from Africa of small-scale harvesters being shot at by enforcement people to get them off the water in areas that were protected without their knowledge. So yeah, I think there's much better ways to protect biodiversity than doing it the way that is being done currently.
Okay, thank you so much. Mr. Barron, I think you were talking about in British Columbia, the MPAs are already at 35%. I'm wondering if you know in Atlantic Canada what percentage of the goal has been reached there.
I'm pretty sure I didn't say anything about BC's MPAs because I wouldn't know too much about what's going on out there. But as I mentioned, 2019, Canada as a whole, we're at 13.8% when they were looking at 10, so they exceeded it in 4 years.
Mr. McIsaac, then that said that in BC we were at 35% of the waters, and you were talking about exemptions for the First Nations fishers, and I'm wondering, are there any exemptions for non-First Nations in any of the MPAs?
There's certainly MPAs that allow fisheries, that allow sports fishing and allow commercial fishing. So there's a variety of different ones. But what I was saying, it's like the rockfish conservation areas. They allow some sports fishing, some trap fishing, even midwater trawl, but they don't allow long line. Commercial longline for rockfish or halibut, but Indigenous fishermen are allowed to do that in those areas, in all 164 of them.
Okay, thank you. To Ms. Barclay, MPAs are often discussed in isolation, but your testimony points to a broader toolbox. From your perspective, how should MPAs be aligned with fish management plans and fishers out in the open waters?
Yes, well, our success and success by other hatcheries like ours we depend heavily on what happens once juvenile salmon reach the river. So estuaries and nearshore areas are critical transition zones for us, where the young salmon can acclimate from fresh to salt water and feed intensively and then grow before heading offshore. These areas provide sheltered habitat and rich food sources that are essential during this vulnerable stage. MPAs from our perspective, and I feel like I'm a real little fish in a big pond here today, but I think our voice is an important one. So your MPAs help safeguard these estuaries and nearshore habitats, improving the chances that the fishery release will survive and return as adults and contribute to the conservation of fisheries and support the sport fisheries industry and provide a food source for the various marine animals and mammals out there.
Are you aware of, or were you part of any consultations as part of the hatcheries group, of which there's many all over BC run by a lot of volunteers? Was there any input provided from hatcheries for the effects that would have to MPAs?
I'm not aware of any. We work closely with the Pacific Salmon Foundation, so often our voice is heard through such organizations such as that. I will say that the DFO is a really important source for us, and I know there's been various talks of cutbacks in personnel and in financing and funding, and I just really want to emphasize to the committee the important work your DFO officers, our community advisors, do on the ground and have been helping and supporting organizations like ours for the last 40 years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clausen. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschamps.
And next we'll go to Mr. Deschamps for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. McIsaac, I'd like to come back. You talked about a disparity in treatment between fishers and other organizations. Can you continue on that?
What exactly line were?
Can you give us examples?
In organizations and fishers?
Pour les règles qui sont en cours dans les marines protégées.
For the rules that are that apply in marine protected areas.
So, you know, the example that I gave for rockfish conservation areas, okay, let's say you know, Haida Gwaii, there's an NMCA, a National Marine Conservation Area, in the southern part of Haida Gwaii. There's about 40% of the area that is closed to all fisheries, but indigenous are exempt from that.
La pêche alimentaire, sociale.
The food and subsistence fishery, or it's a commercial fishery?
That's a good question. Exactly, you know, so the language that's in the NSB, the Network Action Plan that I read out, is questionable whether it means just at FSC, because it's prefaced with, and I quote exactly from it, indigenous harvest and traditional use, so including FSC. So that, to me, goes well beyond FSC. The way that language is actually written is well beyond FSC.
Dernière seconde, Monsieur Barron, sur des exemples d'accommodation.
Can you give examples of accommodations that you asked for but which were refused?
So as previously mentioned, when we asked for the zones that we were able to fish in, we asked them to be a certain size, and those sizes weren't met by the department. When they actually still ended up protecting over 3,300 square kilometers, and we only end up getting, like, through the three zones, a little over 600 square kilometers worth of take. I mean, I know it sounds like a lot, but to put it in perspective, the no-take zone is 2/3 the size of Mr. Morrissey's province.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Deschamps.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deschamps.
Bridge, the last two speakers will have 4 minutes and 4 minutes, and I'll pass the floor over to Mr. Gunn.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McIsaac, Do you believe DFO has adequately consulted fishermen and coastal communities with regard to their current proposals to close 30, even maybe more than 40% of BC's coast to various forms of fishing as part of these underwater parks or marine protected areas?
Definitely think that they haven't done enough, and they haven't listened when they have consulted. So they did a survey after the draft 2 of the NSB, the Network Action Plan. In the coastal communities, they said that their comments on that survey was, we've been left out of the discussion. We see the NSB is creating instability, threatening our way of life. It's a distrusted process. Community impacts have not been considered. That's their comments from the survey that DFO did.
And just to clarify, how long has this process, the NSB process with regard to these marine closures, been going on for? Is this... This is 6 or 7 years now?
So it started in earnest engaging in 2018, I guess. Yeah. So you're...
and you
but
still
it dates back before that. They were doing consultation on MPA networks going back to 2010, 2011.
But you still don't really know what's going on.
So...
what's coming next? What I'm trying to get at is...
If you look at the Network Action Plan and you read the drafts that they put out before, you have a good idea of what's coming. And it's, pretty hurtful for commercial fishing.
Well, it's interesting you bring up these drafts, because when we've had DFO officials here, and I feel like this has been confusing to some of my Liberal colleagues, as it has been for all of us, is they have downplayed or downright denied the fact that these marine planning areas would include what's known as no-take areas or significant closures to fishing. But we have since heard other testimony that has showed us these draft scenarios, as well as heard about other pre-existing MPAs that have been put in recent years in British Columbia that are no-take areas or are essentially no-take areas. Has that been your experience, or what kind of light can you bring to this?
Two areas I'll talk about that don't give me any faith in what they're doing. One is the glass sponge reefs. The fishing industry was involved in the glass sponge reefs in first identifying them in the 1980s and then protecting them voluntarily in the early 2000s and then pushing them into the IFMP process in 2005 and then supporting the whole process of going to MPA. We did 7 years of a consultation on that. We drafted a core protection area, adaptive management zone around it, and a vertical management zone, and it was put into Canada Gazette 1 that way. When it came to Canada Gazette 2, it was in all of the fisheries opportunities in there were denied. After all of the consultation that we did, all of the work that we did, it was all thrown out. And the same thing on sablefish and tuna, on buoy seamounts, that's 187 kilometers off our coast. We went through a process of protecting the fishery there, and now 2018, 10 years after it was established, there is no fishery there.
Really quickly, how devastating would the impacts be on your industry and your fishery if these changes went in as they're laid out in the draft proposals?
The MSB one?
Yeah.
Well, the estimates are, a hit of something like $120 million to the industry. Yeah, so it's pretty significant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. And next we'll go to Mr. Morrissey for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. First question, Mr. McIsaac, you referenced roughly a 60-foot trawler for shrimp. What would that inshore fisher gross in a season, generally?
Pretty low. So most of the trawlers are way less than that, and the current management plan is not supportive of the fishery.
And why is it not supportive of the fishery?
That's a good question. So I would say that there's a difference. The department has been managing the shrimp fishery for the last 27 years as if there's 36 individual stocks. Last year, after almost a decade of trying to get them to do a science review of that, they've identified that there's one stock on the coast, which means that they've been managing it incorrectly for 30 years.
Would it be fair to say, just listening to you, and I appreciate the testimony that all three provided today, is that the industry recognizes there is a need to evaluate fishing efforts, and there could be some value out of restrictions to some area, but the trust, I'll be candid, trust within the department to enforce it that way and respect the input of the fishery is preventing buy-in from fishers? Mr. McIsaac and Mr. Barron?
Well, when you work, in good faith in a process for 7 years and have it upended by what ended up happening was 1,450 form letters sent in to the Canada Gazette 1 process to say we want more protection, and all of the collaborative process that 3 ENGOs.
And it was consistent form letters?
It was the same, identical. The department identified as there were 1,450 identical letters.
Barron?
So when St. Anne's Bank was actually trying to be formed, and we actually had a letter writing as well, one generic letter sent in by all of LFA 27. Pardon me?
What was in the generic letter in relation to that?
To be honest, that's been that long ago. But I do have it on file. I can definitely send it to you. Yeah.
Was it supportive or was it raising issues?
It was raising issues, but it was also supportive and understanding that we need to have the conservation. But we were asking for them to listen to our recommendations because we felt the no-take zone was more than sufficient.
That goes to my question earlier, is what I'm hearing from witness, is that there is fisher support out there for conservation measures, but the negotiation style between the department and fishers is pushing fishers away. Is that what you're telling this committee?
Yes, as there isn't going to be a fisherman that's going to sit here and tell you that we don't support conservation, because without conservation, there's no product and there's no livelihood in our coastal communities. So yes, we support conservation 100%.
Some areas, fishing styles or methodology may have to be adjusted.
Yes.
To protect the future of the fishery.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. I'm afraid that's the end of the time that we have for this panel. But I do want to thank our witnesses for being here today and traveling long distances to provide some testimony. Mr. Barron, if you'd like to provide that information in writing to the committee, and likewise for our witnesses. Anything else you'd like to provide in writing, please do send that to that committee. And you're welcome to stay in the room for our second panel. But at this point, we're going to briefly suspend while we welcome our new witnesses. Colleagues, we're back. Would just like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses, although I think they might have been here for the last panel, so they might have already heard this, but please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. Et en ce qui concerne l'interprétation.
And concerning interpretation, you can use the earpiece and choose the channel for the various languages.
Comments should be addressed through the chair. But with that, let me welcome, I would like to welcome our second panel of witnesses. We have Mark Carr, professor from University of California at Santa Cruz. We have Fraser McDonald from the University of British Columbia, and Keith Selvin, the executive director, Newfoundland Aquaculture Industry Association. So with that, we're going to jump right into opening statements for 5 minutes or less, starting with Professor Carr.
Mr. Wheeler and committee members, I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this committee's study of marine and coastal protections, and more specifically, the application of spatial management approaches to achieving those protections. My background in the science and policy of marine protected areas is summarized in my nomination biography, so I won't spend time repeating that. But to emphasize my experience in the planning process and subsequent monitoring and evaluation of California's statewide MPA network, and my experience as a scientific advisor to the Great Bear Sea MPA network design process and the ongoing development of the monitoring and evaluation program. I am less familiar with the processes elsewhere in Canada. For further context, I want to emphasize that I hope to help inform your study and not to advocate either for or against marine protected areas. I don't do that in part because it would jeopardize my continued involvement in conducting the evaluation of California's network if I were to convey a perceived bias on this topic. To that end, I have put together a document that summarizes responses to the 3 overarching questions that I was asked to address. I don't know when you'll receive that. I'm still finishing it. But it includes references and summaries of documents and publications relevant to each of those questions. I will make 1 or 2 overarching comments for context to the responses in that document and today. California developed a very robust ecological monitoring and evaluation program to assess how well the conservation goals of the network are being achieved. However, as reflected in the state's decadal review of the network, that program did not give sufficient attention to socioeconomic consequences, including both fisheries and First Nations. Nor did the development of the monitoring program engage those stakeholders. In contrast, my experience to date in the design of the Great Barrier Sea Network Evaluation Program indicates that process intends to do a much more inclusive and better job of addressing how it will evaluate those socioeconomic consequences. I understand that this is also the case in other provinces, but I'm not as familiar. However, because many of the MPAs and the existing monitoring programs in the Great Bear Sea are younger than the California network, there are simply fewer results to be able to point to. So I'm going to stop there so that we have important time for your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Carr. I understand that we haven't yet received that document, so if you could send that to the committee, we'll make sure that it gets translated and circulated to all members. But with that, we're going to go to Mr. McDonald for up to 5 minutes of opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear today and speak to my direct experience with the marine planning process on the Pacific Coast, how the implementation and the uncertainty surrounding the many ongoing draft processes are affecting families, jobs, investment, and community health on the Pacific region. My name is Fraser McDonald. I'm from Vancouver, and for the past 15 years, I've owned and operated a commercial fishing business with my wife. Over the last 20 years, I've participated in many of the fisheries on our Pacific Coast and learned a great deal about during my time on the water. I currently serve as the president of the Pacific Prawn Fishermen's Association, and for the last 3 years, I've had the privilege of working with UBC's Institute for the Oceans and Fisheries as an adjunct professor. My comments today, however, are my own and are shaped by my experience in the industry and throughout the MPA planning process. I spend about 6 months a year at sea, and so I know firsthand why we need protections for ecosystems and biodiversity. The wildlife and natural beauty of our coasts are incredible. Canada's coasts are worth protecting, and fishermen understand this better than most. Our livelihoods depend on doing our work sustainably over the long term. Please hear my voice today not as an argument against marine protected areas, but as a call for a Made in Canada implementation method, one that recognizes our international commitments but doesn't shackle us to a standardized international implementation plan that doesn't reflect the reality on our coasts. We can protect what is currently unprotected without undermining a sustainable industry and the coastal economies that depend on it. A witness this committee mentioned last week that some fish stocks in Canada need rebuilding. What he didn't mention were the many world-leading examples of co-management that currently exist in Canadian fisheries. It's my opinion that rebuilding stocks or protecting biodiversity should not be approached in a Canadian context by drawing two-dimensional boundaries on a chart with static implementation. Canada's international commitments were based on global templates designed primarily for countries with little or no fisheries management or monitoring, and that's not the Canadian reality. For countries without management systems, static no-take style MPAs may be a fast way to protect unprotected biodiversity. But Canada already has extensive fisheries management, monitoring, and enforcement in place. 30% protection of a country's EEZ with weak oversight, even with half of it designated no-take, would still be far less robust than what we currently have in the Pacific region. Our coast already has approximately 35% protection through existing static MPAs, and our wild fisheries are further protected through our IFMPs. Despite this, the previous federal government has been pursuing significant additional static protected zones throughout our coast, many with no-take provisions that would devastatingly reduce landings in some fisheries from 20 to 50%. If we want to protect static benthic ecosystems, then static protection can be the right tool, targeted to specific sites addressing specific threats that are not already being managed, but fishing effort impacts should be managed through IFMPs, not blunt spatial closures. Instead of celebrating collaborative success and fixing identifiable gaps, Canada is on course for a future where we have voluntarily legislated our wild capture fisheries out of business and risked our coastal communities' survival by applying a standardized international solution to a uniquely Canadian coast. In October, I attended a lunch with Minister Thompson where she expressed a concern at the lack of people under 35 years old in fisheries. In 2018, I had the privilege of addressing this committee, and I spoke about the looming labour gap in BC's fisheries. I can say now with confidence that we're living in the midst of that shortage. The MPA process in BC is a main driver of an exodus from our industry. 3 of my boats were purchased from multi-generational fishermen who retired and sold, not because their children lacked interest or skill, but because they chose other careers: tugboats, ferries, coastal pilots. They loved fishing, but why gamble on a future with such uncertainty of access? The same is true for many of my young captains and crew. My fishing operation employs up to 25 people during our peak fishing season. These are talented, committed, and many could become boat owners one day, yet I fully expect most will leave the industry, and I don't blame them. Why would someone borrow over $1 million and buy a boat and license that could be devalued to nearly nothing within 10 years? Why commit to a 15-year bank mortgage on an asset that may not exist before it's paid off? If Canada is serious about building a blue economy, a strong economy that works for everyone, and strengthening domestic industries, I'll say the current policy is doing the opposite of it. It's impeding investment, forcing the next generation of fishermen out. We need certainty of access, plain and simple. Fishing requires years of mentorship, skill building, and local knowledge. We cannot fix this labor shortage overnight, but we can at least start now. What I would like to see is a transparent, made-in-Canada approach to meeting our international obligations with meaningful industry collaboration. And by that, I mean actually seeing industry advice incorporated into outcomes, not just being allowed to speak at consultation meetings. This would go a long way to restoring trust and with it, investment. Fishing is already a hard life, months at sea, months in shipyards, market volatility and global trade pressures. Fishermen face adversity with resilience because it's our job. But the added stress that's been imposed during the prolonged uncertainty of the MPA process in BC has exhausted an already stretched workforce. Fishers who engage with DFO in this process do so as volunteers, donating immense amounts of our time, energy, and resources, and I can tell you our industry is exhausted from the last 10+ years of this with little to show for our effort. I hope this committee will examine the path that Canada is on and advise the government to be brave internationally, change course, and use the tools that we already have for fisheries, and use MPAs where they truly will add protection to protect the unprotected. Thank you, and sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. McDonald. And we're going to conclude with the opening remarks from Keith Sullivan for 5 minutes or less.
Okay, now microphone is on. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity. NIA currently represents 130 members comprised of aquaculture farming companies and suppliers to the industry with a vision to promote excellence in the aquaculture industry of Newfoundland and Labrador. It's proud of the work of its members and the 2,500 people who depend on aquaculture in the province. Our members produce salmon, trout, mussels, oysters, and seaweeds, and 2024 was the highest value ever for aquaculture in the province's history. This past year, I've had engagement with at least 3 different federal departments regarding development of MPAs. Much of my career, I've been engaged in management of marine fisheries under a broad scope of conservation, protection, and marine spatial planning processes. NIA members believe strongly in marine protections. They require a healthy marine environment and invest significantly in responsible environmental practices. Instituting a closed area is hailed as protecting the ocean. This is an oversimplified way to look at ocean protection. Many of the threats to marine environments don't come from any ocean activity. Our oceans are impacted by global warming, all sources of pollution or waste, runoff from land. I feel that Canada has simply taken a terrestrial model of protections and applied it to marine areas. In Canada, there are significant environmental oversights for projects and very strict fishing standards. We must find balanced and advanced methods to conduct marine spatial planning in Canada, where we already have robust marine protections. Canada has significant opportunities to responsibly grow marine sectors and protect marine life. But we must do better than racing to close large swaths of ocean to Canadians, especially those who work and live on our coasts. It can't be a race to hit an arbitrary number, the 30 by 30, that's a proxy for protection and do irreparable harm to our coastal communities now and into the future. The UN hopes to see 35% growth in aquaculture by 2030. The World Bank, in Harnessing the Waters, finds aquaculture could generate as many as 22 million new jobs by 2050. If stakeholders capitalize on the $1.5 trillion investment opportunity in the sector. The Blue Economy, Canada's Blue Economy strategy states it was recommended that we should support the economic development of new aquaculture species and promote the essential role of aquaculture in sustainable domestic and global food production and the future economic prosperity of coastal communities. We have the longest coastline in the world. Globally, including Canada, there are struggles with food security, especially high-quality, healthy seafoods. Canada has been consistently falling behind in seafood production. We were once a top 5 producer of seafood globally, and now we are not in the top 20. Right now, Canada is ignoring the needs and opportunities, and the approach of simply closing marine areas will see our country fall further behind. The growth in areas protected went from 0.9% to around 16% in a decade, a 1,600% increase. It is important to consider the pressure already placed upon coastal communities. Closing areas to industries and activities can impact us by losses of livelihoods, traditions, and future opportunities. In many cases, it will concentrate activities in other areas, so fish harvesters will have to move to other areas, use more carbon, increase cost, diminish food security, and often based on uncertain goals, conservation goals. Parks Canada has been involved in a process of pushing to implement a large NMCA on the south coast of Newfoundland. It was to be larger than PEI and would have serious negative economic impacts for the region, cease investment activity, and curtail future opportunities. Parks Canada refused to engage in any socioeconomic review of potential impacts. This was inadequate. The obvious failure to properly consult was felt by all sectors: fisheries, mining, energy, aquaculture, and municipalities. The goals were not clear, and public trust has been lost because of the approach taken to MPA development. The sweeping protection standards are rigid. Regardless of the specific reasons for developing an MPA, Parks Canada emphasised finfish aquaculture will not be allowed. Many activities are automatically been excluded from operating in MPAs regardless of the circumstances or goals of the MPA. Such an unreasonable standard can only be detrimental to Canadians. I listed some recommendations. Number 1, a thorough independent socioeconomic impact review must be completed in the first stage of considering an MPA. 2, revamp the consultative process. More consultation must be done with provincial governments, municipal governments and communities, and especially major industry stakeholders whose livelihoods are going to be impacted. Focus on a strategy that allows responsible marine farming within protected areas which does not impede specific conservation goals. And 4, consider having one federal government department leading marine protections and modern marine spatial planning focused on balanced Canadian values. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sullivan. And with that, we're going to go into the first round of questioning, the 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses. Found each of your opening statements very interesting. Thank you very, very much. But I'm going to start out here today with Mr. Sullivan. Mr. Sullivan, you mentioned earlier that, Mr. McIsaac mentioned earlier that MPAs are being created with a view of the past. So, in your experience as the president of the Fish, Food and Allied Workers Union in Newfoundland and Labrador, I should say you're fairly familiar with the Hawk Channel closed area and the Funk Island closed area?
Yeah, relatively, yes.
So one of the arguments that we get from people that are against closing of marine space to economic activity is that outcomes can't be measured. So what was the reason that those two closed areas became closed?
Well, from going back to that, it had kind of preceded my time with the FFAW to a certain degree, but most of the consideration for the closures of those areas, and I know particularly in the Hawk off of Labrador, fish harvesters there wanted to protect their very valuable crab resource. So closing the area to bottom impacting gear, like bottom trawling and gill nets obviously would have impact on crab there. So that's what harvesters certainly believed was the goal of that Hawk in particular.
So what's been the trajectory of the snow crab resource biomass in the Hawk Channel since that area was closed to bottom trawling?
Right now I don't have necessarily the latest science, but generally the trajectory, has been over that region 2G, and general, I mean, there's been a significant decrease in crab, and it's been a tough time for people fishing and depending on the area there. And I'm not aware of any significant differences inside and outside the closed area.
Would you agree that that's a measured outcome?
I suppose it could be a measurable outcome. Like I said, I don't have the fully comparable stats, but I mean, absolutely. I mean, that's one way to measure it if there is no obvious difference for what was the issue there.
Recently, you've been involved in the pushback on the South Coast Fjords National Marine Conservation Area, otherwise known as an NMCA. To your knowledge, were any foreign forces at play, either financially or otherwise, in the influencing of public opinion about that conservation area?
So I'd just say very generally, kind of on the higher level, the NMCA was run through Parks Canada. Most of my experience in the past have been with DFO through marine protected areas, and the consultation here from Parks Canada left a lot to be desired, and we can look at opportunities to deal with that. But there's definitely seemed to be strong input from the NGO community, many of which we know their parent organizations, and a lot of their funding and money does come from international sources, particularly the United States, absolutely.
Of wild salmon stocks on the South Coast. I'm not, to my knowledge, I think there's a wild fishery that's not that regulated in St. Pierre-Miquelon. could they be taking some of the wild fish that your industry was blamed for? And I understand that some of the great supporters of that marine conservation area were supporting it because they wanted to shut down net pen salmon farming to save wild fish, while a foreign country, France, sitting 20 or 30 miles offshore, has a wild salmon fishery. What do you think of that, Mr. Sullivan?
Well, again, I would say, first of all, to salmon. I grew up commercial fishing in a home that depended on wild salmon harvest to put the bread on the table and keep the lights on. And we all know before 1990, the trajectory of salmon for a century had been declining. We had big declines in the 80s and 90s before there was any salmon farming in the area. And we've seen similar trajectories in areas where there is no aquaculture. So I think it's clear that there's much bigger issues to dealing with wild salmon stocks. So we're legitimately concerned with it. But exactly, I think looking at the other sources of impacts has not got the attention it's received, whether that's predation or impacts from other fisheries, like if there is, the extent of the fishery in St. Pierre and Miquelon or other places.
I got a couple of more seconds. Okay, I got a really important question, Mr. Chair. To Mr. Carr, we've had ENGOs come to this committee and say that the harvesting of seals would have no impact on biodiversity, and that outcomes of culls are never measured, and oftentimes not, if they do arrive to some kind of a discovered outcome, is not what was desired in the first place. Have you heard groups say that culling of species doesn't really protect other species? Have you heard that before?
So I'm afraid, I'm sorry, Mr. Carr, I'm going to have to jump in here. We're well over the time. But this is a very important question. Mr. Carr, if you'd like to submit that answer in writing, it would be much appreciated by the committee. But with that, we're going to move on to Mr. Connors for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for coming out. I just want to point out that I'm not here to blame anybody. I'm here to find and study what can be done to make sure we have a sustainable fishery, and we have the conservationists with it as well. So I just want to do that. I want to start out with Mr. Sullivan. And so over the past, I guess since the cod moratorium, fish management and how we manage our fish stocks has become very important, and was probably in the industry prior to that, but that's when the main focus came on it. So my question is, and I know that the industry is concerned with the conservation and the sustainability of the species. So if we don't protect our food source, or the food source for our food source, what would happen to for a healthy ocean or the habitat in the ocean?
Well, I guess first of all, I think we'd all agree that conservation is paramount and very important. So I think, and some of the other witnesses put it very eloquently, we have very robust and detailed fisheries management plans to manage those fisheries generally. So I think, when you're talking about protecting those species, that's the primary way to do it. So I think, protecting, as you say, the food source of our food source is really important. I'm not sure if I'm fully answering your question, but I definitely agree that it's paramount.
What I'm getting at, do you think that we can do marine protected areas or conservation areas and have a sustainable fishery at the same time?
Yes, I think we can do it. Right now, I think, like I said, the growth in these boxes that we're putting in has been, like I said, 1,600% increase. Is that the best way to protect our marine environment? There's definitely other ways to do it, and you've got to consult with those, who are using the ocean. And I think that's been the problem so far. So it's been so quick to what we see as conservation, putting these lines, as others said, on the map, and not really giving full consideration to those who are fishing or doing other activities, whether it's mining or aquaculture. So I think we got to do a better job of dealing with the people who have the most to lose.
And going back to your, I guess your former position and your current position now with the aquaculture industry, there's been confusion about take and no-take zones within the different areas, MPAs or MNCAs. From your experience, have you seen areas where there's no take?
Yes, there's absolutely no take. I mean, different degrees of not being able to take any fish, but even the most recent one that's been in the news last couple of days, proposed through Parks Canada, they absolutely have to have no-take zones. That's within the protection standards. And what was really troubling to most people involved there, Parks Canada were explaining to people, we only want 5% that's you're not going to be able to take. But then when you go into their document, which was the policy on the establishment of management of NMCAs, they say the goal of this is to place the majority of the area in fully protected areas. So their guiding management document was saying that we got to have over 50% at least. Majority is over 50%, but they're saying no, don't worry about it. It's only going to be 5%. So it was very hard for people whose livelihoods depended on that to trust the word when their guiding documents told us differently. So, and that was only one of the many problems with the consultation on that NMCA.
I'll stick with you for this question as well. I got a number of other questions, but this question, for the consultation or how MPAs are developed, what would be your recommendation? I know you spoke about this, I think, in your opening statements, and in particular, how should the industry, the fishers, be involved in that process?
Well, I'd start by probably describing I was, again, just very quickly for people who wouldn't be aware, I was spent about 20 years while I was a harvester growing up, and spent about 20 years with the Fish, Food and Allied workers and a lot of fisheries management and stock assessments and things like that. But so the involvement is key from the start. I was also involved with the Eastport MPA. 30 seconds. So the thing there, that was a grassroots. Movement. Harvesters in the area supported it. That's the opposite of what we're seeing with most of the MPAs now. Again, they just don't have the involvement from the local people, harvesters or other industries, and that's the biggest problem, not getting that buy-in early.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Connors. Prochainement.
And next, we'll go to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us this evening and answering our questions. I'd like to start with Mr. Sullivan. I was following what happened this week in Newfoundland with the province withdrew from a marine protected area. I'd like to get your perspective on this new development.
Is widely supported in Newfoundland and Labrador, the decision by the provincial government and Premier Wakeham to withdraw from this MOU. Quite frankly, the consultation was terrible from the start, and as I kind of alluded to, there was no trust in what the final product would be. And as one very direct example, is if you're going to do something like this, you got to do a socioeconomic review. That's one of my recommendations. They didn't even consider doing a socioeconomic review and ignored people's concerns right from the very start. So I mean, there was no trust in the process, and I believe it was going to be very, very problematic for many people who depend on that area. So people are pleased with the decision, generally speaking.
Notez là, votre suggestion justement là, de...
Yes, and I heard your suggestion to study the socioeconomic aspects, but when we want, and there will be socioeconomic impacts when we want to protect an area, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to move forward. Is your proposal to completely set aside the project, or do you think there is a way to move forward with a process where there are consultations, the socioeconomic effects are taken into consideration, and how do you think we should move forward on this?
Well, part of the problem is not having clear conservation goals. We had this area was nearly 7,000 square kilometers. If there's and again larger than PEI, if there's benthic habitat or sensitive areas that we want to protect, let's do that and let's have a conversation about that. Let's talk about how we can achieve the goals besides just simply trying to get a target of the 30 by 30. I think that's the thing that's clouding I guess the conservation goals overall. It's kind of an artificial rush to get to this and not necessarily really considering, are we doing a good job here? So I think people will be open to real conservation as opposed to just a massive marine park.
D'aller de façon plus mesurée. Le fait que le gouvernement a...
To move in a more measured way. So the fact that the government has given permits for oil exploration along the coast of Newfoundland, do you think that may reduce the social acceptability because they're saying, well, we're going to protect this zone, but then there will be oil exploration elsewhere?
So in that particular area around that NMCA, I don't believe there's any oil permits, but I generally believe, and there's people on all sides, but I think there's people who are supportive of a responsible oil and gas industry in Newfoundland and Labrador, a very important part of our economy. But at the same time, many people depend on the ocean, and if there's areas that, again, sensitive issues or species we need to protect, let's look at ways of doing that. And I think generally that's where people are, as a more sensible, reasonable, measured, balanced approach to marine conservation.
Votre perspective sur cet aspect-là?
Mr. Carr, what are your thoughts on this?
I don't know how I understood that, but I did. I think there's two elements to this. One is you've heard from many people, many of the previous speakers, this fundamental importance of co-management, right? The management that engages the industry. And I think that speaks not just to fisheries management, not just to conservation efforts, but even down to the details of these socioeconomic evaluations, right? These are model predictions with all sorts of assumptions of what those protected areas are going to regulate, and engaging the various stakeholders, not necessarily to do the modeling, but to have input on how those models are constructed, what they consider, I think would make those models, those predictions, both more accurate and more acceptable. I don't want ENGOs doing all the socioeconomic modeling. I wouldn't want fisheries industry doing all the socioeconomic modeling. There's questions of the government doing it as well. Sorry.
For example, en Californie,
if we look at the study of the socioeconomic consequences, there must be some in California. How was that aspect dealt with? Was there compensation to fishers for loss of revenue? How was that managed?
And so there's two aspects of that. One is the socioeconomic predictions, like we said, that emerge from the planning process. And so there were groups of scientists in that planning process that were doing these evaluations of the trade-off between the conservation value versus the socioeconomic impact, explicitly though to fisheries, with the metric of yield being balanced with conservation. And so that helps set up the evaluation of different design possibilities with respect to the trade-offs that emerge from that. But more importantly, too, is what you're getting at, which is the actual evaluation, the collection of socioeconomic data that then is used to truly identify what those consequences are. California, like I said, did not do a good job of that. And so the hope is that the Canadian effort will.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Deschênes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
The second round of questioning with Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses again for your testimony. I want to start off with Mr. Carr, if I could. Mr. Carr, what needs to be in place to measure the results of marine and coastal protection plans?
More than anything, a monitoring program. A monitoring program that's designed to evaluate the consequences of the creation of that protected area or the network of the protected area, but done in a way that you can clearly attribute the effects that you see to the protected area. And that's the difficult part.
Would that also include having baselines to know what was there initially?
Part, when possible, yes. Sometimes, because you don't know where those protected areas are going to happen, you don't have previous monitoring data to develop that baseline. For that reason, we have developed analytical approaches that just look at responses subsequent to implementation that are rigorous enough to attribute the effects that we see to the establishment of the MPA.
Okay, could fisheries management plans or integrated fisheries management plans be as effective in limiting the impact on species and biodiversity?
So those are very different. So the question is whether fisheries management can do a sufficient job of protecting the species that are harvested by those fisheries, and I think the answer is yes. We see sustainable fisheries in most of the West Coast of North America, right? So they're doing a sufficient job protecting those species for that purpose, for the fishery. That's very different from asking whether they're protecting ecosystems.
There are overlapping IFMPs for the same area to manage all impacted species. Would that be as effective for managing biodiversity? If you had fisheries management plans for all species that were being harvested or affected,
that involved monitoring and evaluation on biodiversity effects as well. I think that's what you're asking.
Would that be as effective as a closed area?
Might or might not. And the devil is in the fact that when you exclude fishing from areas, it provides a more robust evaluation of what their effects are.
Okay, has any country the size of Canada ever been able to effectively monitor and enforce the direct effects of marine closed areas?
Well, California has, for example, right?
Canada.
Well, the length of California is no short distance. I mean, the California coast there's 124 marine protected areas along the length of California.
In previous testimony, or in previous evidence that I've seen, the net benefits of the coastal protections have been unmeasurable on the outlying areas.
For so there again, we have to be cautious. When you say the outlying areas, so there's more than enough evidence now that those protected areas established in California lead to conservation value of the species within those protected areas.
Okay, that seems to be disputable depending on the witness. So,
I mean, we have published papers that demonstrate that unequivocally. But no, the detail is what you in your question. You said in other areas. So that's a different question. The question of whether those protected areas are affecting regional responses of species, that has not yet been evaluated. And that's one of the critical questions of what the overarching effect of the MPAs are.
Thank you. Mr. McDonald, Mr. Sullivan, quickly, in your opinion, after years of being on the water and in the industry, would you say that proper integrated fisheries management plans could do a as good or better job than closed areas?
Yeah, it's my opinion from my experience that I think that IFMPs are the way. We already have them in place. We have the tools and advisory boards. That's the tool that we should use. And if there is, like I said in my introduction, static areas that need protection for static ecosystem health, we should use an MPA for that, but we should manage the fish that move in and out of that MPA through our IFMPs.
No, I think it's like what he said. Yeah, okay, that works for me. It makes sense. That's pretty much summarized for me too.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Clausen for 5 minutes.
Thanks so much. I'm going to split my time with Mr. Morrissey. I think it's the last round here. So, Mr. Connors just asked Mr. Carr if you could submit those reports in writing that you referenced in the last answer. Mr. McDonald, love to hear the passion in your voice about ensuring that the younger generation continues on in this industry and how we can rebuild this industry. I really appreciated the comment that you said about a made in Canada approach. And I'm wondering if you could just expand a little bit on that from your experience and perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. What I was trying to get at with the Made in Canada approach was, we committed to international obligations and we want to make sure we meet those, but I don't think we need to implement them in a way that is standardized internationally. I think we can look at what we're already doing, and that's why I mentioned, we want to protect what's currently unprotected. So our species and our stocks that we harvest are already protected through our IFMPs and managed, and we have, each different fishery has super robust management and oversight and monitoring. And I think if we really take that into account as we go forward in that MPA process, we should make sure that the things that need MPAs to be protected, which are, whether it's sponge or deep sea corals, let's do that. But let's make sure that within those closure areas, if there are species that can be harvested that aren't going to impact the conservation objective for that site, that should be, we should be allowed to have those fisheries, and that should be just written out in our IFMPs. And we have had a lot of examples in the early implementation of certain sites in the NSB that are not doing that. There's a conservation objective in a specific area, and fisheries that don't interact with that are being shut out. And I can actually say in one example, we did have a good example of how it can be done. The offshore MPA it's the largest MPA in BC off the west coast of Vancouver Island. During that development process, it was put in to protect the sensitive benthic area and deep sea vents. Originally, the albacore tuna fishery, which is a surfish troll fishery, was going to be not allowed because they didn't want to have any commercial fishing. Once they realized that we fish in 3 feet of water and they're protecting benthic zones that are in 9,000 feet of water, the albacore tuna fishery is allowed in that MPA, as it should be. And so if we can use that sensibility across the board through the NSB and the other processes in the South Coast, I think we can find a happy medium.
Mr. Morrissey.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Mr. Carr. Mr. Carr, you listened intently to the answer Mr. McDonald gave to Mr. Arnold's question, going back a bit. Could you give an opinion on that? Where I believe Mr. McDonald stated that there is methodology you could use to achieve some of the objectives without the rigid approach of MPAs.
Areas. Yeah, well, one thing I was going to mention, I'm not sure if this is because I was largely agreeing with some of the comments he was making, but one of the tools, so when we think of MPAs as fisheries management tools, which I'm not a fan of necessarily, the way people think of them for determining the amount of take, the amount and location of where species are harvested, that's generally what people think of as using MPAs as fisheries tools. But they also provide other opportunities, and this actually goes back to the question that I had earlier, which is one of the biggest challenges that you have in managing fisheries is to be able to distinguish whether the changes that you're seeing is due to fishing mortality, right, in space and time, or to environmental variation. And environmental variation now, as you've heard from others, climate change is the biggest threat to fisheries anywhere on the west coast of North America. And so how do you evaluate whether the changes that you're seeing is due to climate change or to fishing pressure? These spatial areas that do and do not allow fishing is the most direct way that we can evaluate whether the changes that we're seeing is due to climatic effects versus fishing effects. And that typically is to the benefit of the fisheries, because classic examples in California, where we saw the demise of the red urchin fishery in Northern California, and we saw the loss of the recreational abalone fishery in Northern California, it was clear by comparing the responses of those species in and out of the MPAs that it was driven by climate and not overfishing, right? And that's just one example of how the tool can be used.
Mr. Carr, briefly, would you agree?
There will be another opportunity
synopsis?
to ask questions afterwards, so maybe just hold that thought, and that question can be answered later. But avec ça, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour.
With that, we'll go to Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, if Mr. McDonald could answer the last question.
Yeah, I think Mr. Carr has a lot more experience in the background of the specifics of that. But what I would say is that I think that we should manage fish with fisheries policy and fisheries management. And I think if there is certain ecosystems that we want to protect, then static closures can be good for that. But managing fish harvesting with static closures is not the answer.
Mr. McDonald, I'll continue with you. The question that I'm wondering is, how do we advance in the protection of our waters to protect biodiversity? We all agree that we need to ensure the sustainability of fisheries, but we need to move forward with the support of fishers and stakeholders. And how do you see that? How do we proceed? Because we've talked a lot about analyzing the socioeconomic consequences, but my question is, okay, so then we can adjust fishing bans to try to minimize the socioeconomic consequences, and that may direct how we proceed, and that's logical, but there are still socioeconomic consequences nevertheless. How do we seek out the approval of fishers in the process?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that we need to figure out as we go. I would say, from my perspective, there's been a serious breach of trust in the implementation so far with DFO and with Parks and Oceans Canada, the way that the process has gone. Starting in 2018, you guys had a witness last week who did an incredible job getting hundreds of fishermen in a room in BC, and that marine planning team, Grant Dovey, was one of the leaders on that, created a map layer for every single fishery, and we went site by site, and we moved boundaries, and we made compromises, and it is an incredible body of work with like thousands of years of fisherman knowledge going into that. That was submitted between Draft 1 and Draft 2, and I think, don't quote me on the numbers, but I think it was like a 75% reduction in economic impact, and they actually exceeded all the biodiversity targets for every single one of the 300 and some odd sites in Draft 1. That was submitted after an incredible amount of work, and what we saw in Draft 2 was, from our perspective, none of our recommendations were taken into account, and actually Draft 2 was worse for the fisheries than Draft 1. And what we then found out was that going forward, rather than implementing it as one plan that we could have feedback on from the beginning and know what our outcome is going to be 10 years from now, so we can have, a secure way to, a secure industry to invest in, it was going to go site by site. And so that site-by-site process so far, the first couple we've had, the feedback that we've given when it gets publicized is not at all taken into consideration. So we need to make sure to rebuild that trust.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Deschênes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
Bridge last couple rounds, so it'll be 4 minutes and 4 minutes, and then that'll be the end of the panel here. So that's Mr. Gunn, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McDonald, from your kind of vantage point and experience, do you believe the federal government's implementation of this crusade to close 30% of Canada's coast to various fishing activities by 2030 has been driven by science and an evidence-based desire to preserve certain ecological areas, or has it been driven by politics?
Yeah, I think I believe the people within Oceans and Parks Canada and DFO that are doing the actual work, I think are doing it for the right reasons. But I would say as an industry, if you were to ask most people on the West Coast, we would say that the process seemed so driven by time and with an outcome already predetermined that it was being done more for political reasons than truly for conservation, and that is what fishermen want. We want a system that implements it with conservation in mind, not politics.
And how devastating would, from your vantage point, I mean, you mentioned, I think, that you were on the water for 6 months of the year. How devastating would these closures be to the fishing industry should the realities that are laid out in the draft proposals put forward by DFO become a reality?
Yeah, it would be crushing to our industry. I mean, you get to a certain point where there's a tipping point and there's not enough fish being landed up and down the coast to support offload facilities and truck drivers and all the things that we need to make the industry work, all the infrastructure. And if it goes through as set out in draft 2, we'll be well past that point. The prawn fishery in particular that is a big part of my income and my year. We won't have a fishery anymore. You can't take the amount of licenses that we have and the amount of fishing effort for the coast, take away 40% of it, and still have an economically or biologically sustainable fishery.
This was like the #1 reason that people were exiting the industry, not wanting to take the financial risk to get in the industry, take out loans, buy boats, that kind of a thing. Can you lay it out for us? This has been going on for years, this process, and we've had DFO officials in here just months ago and still saying 2 different things about whether areas were going to be no take, not no take, what the economic impacts were going to be, no socioeconomic studies having been conducted at all. What is the impact of, because the Northern Shelf bioregion is not in place at the moment, what is the impact of just the uncertainty of not knowing what is coming tomorrow and the day after?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to get at in my intro there. That uncertainty that has been created has really driven people out of the fishery because, like I say, I mean, it's going to take you 15 years to pay off a $1.5 million prawn license. If what is in draft 2, which is being said what's going to happen, goes into place, in 15 years we won't have a viable prawn fishery. So it is the #1 driver of fear of investment right now. Boats require a massive amount of upkeep. We every year we look at what we made for the year and we budget for our R&M for our boats. People are holding off on big long-term projects because while we know what draft 2 says, we don't actually know what's going to happen once those MPs are in place. What are our fishery managers going to do to make sure that we still have a viable fishery once these are in place? We don't know, and our fishery managers often don't know either.
Really quickly, Mr. Carr, could there be some ecological concerns about pushing the same size fishing fleet into a smaller and smaller area by creating a vast network of MPAs if the quota remains the same, that you're going to have the possibility of heavier or localized overfishing rather than spreading out along an entire coastline?
In that case, what you would do, as you're suggesting, is you would really change the landscape of fishing mortality, and it would be increased where you concentrate that fishing mortality and alleviate it elsewhere. So the real question is, how do you make the balance so as to prevent that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. And our last questioner here will be Mr. Morrissey for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank the witness and this round and the earlier round who really addressed this issue from lifelong experiences. And so thank you for your testimony here. Mr. Carr, can Canada achieve its objective to protect sensitive parts of the oceans and protecting the fishery at the same time? Are those two a contradiction?
I think there's inherent trade-offs between the two, but you can balance the two objectives. I mean, it's been demonstrated at least throughout California. There haven't been any fisheries that have been lost with the implementation of 124 marine protected areas along the coast of California. Having said that, like I said in my introduction, we have not done a sufficient socioeconomic analysis of the well-being of those, but they certainly can persist with one another.
Donald, you agree? It's your livelihood.
I believe they can coexist. I believe we can have robust fisheries and a robust economy on the coast, and I believe we can also protect the things that are currently unprotected, that need to be protected to maintain biodiversity.
What does the department have to do in the next year, 10 months? To do away with 10 years of consultation, which leads to, and I totally agree with, unacceptable anxiety within the fishing industry. It's unacceptable, and there's no reason to take that long.
I would say we need to change course on the way it's being implemented, and we need to make sure that when consultation with industry is done, which it is being done, no one's saying it's not, but our advice really needs to be taken into consideration, because when we're going to those meetings and saying, if you do this, we won't have a fishery anymore, and they're saying, thanks for coming. And then when it comes, like, and they listen, they appreciate it, but when the things are released, our advice is not taken into consideration. So if we can change course, and if we can have a collaborative approach, the fishing industry is there and willing to do it. We have an incredible amount of knowledge. There's an incredible amount of First Nations, commercial fishermen knowledge up and down the coast. We want to collaborate. We want these things to be implemented in a way where we're protecting what's unprotected and we have a vibrant economy. And that can be done, but we need to have a change in direction where we work together.
Thanks, Chair. No, I've heard all I need to.
It's a good way of wrapping it then. I just want to, that'll conclude our second panel. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today and also traveling a long distance to provide the testimony. It's going to be incredibly important, as you've heard today, as we're putting together our reports and importantly, recommendations for the government on how to move forward. So before we end, just want to mention that our next meeting will be on Monday, where we're going to continue the study on marine and coastal protections. It's the will of the committee to adjourn. Adjourn.
Thank you.